Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to episode 4 of Conversations, where we speak to AI about Islam, beliefs, and Dawah. So, in the previous episode, we've seen the burden of proof, hypocrisy regarding atheism, and how an atheist cannot limit you to the scientific method to prove the existence of the Creator. So, at this point, one could be asking, if we cannot use the scientific method to prove the existence of Allah, what can we use? Is there any other way to do that? The answer is yes. There are multiple ways of doing that. And the way we're going to present these ways or these categories is going to be in correlation with what an atheist might accept, a naturalist might accept. So in other words, we're going to try to build a bridge, right? We're going to try to build a bridge between what we use as Muslims and what an atheist or a naturalist or someone who relies on science could be using. So we're just going to take it from where we stopped last time. Hey, do you remember our discussion on how it would be hypocritical to demand scientific evidence to prove God's existence?
Yes. You were making the point that if someone demands scientific evidence for God, while knowing that methodological naturalism in science automatically excludes supernatural explanations, then they're setting an impossible condition. Your argument was that this isn't rejecting God because of a lack of evidence, but because they've chosen a method that by definition can't consider God, making the demand seem insincere or even hypocritical.
Okay. Let's continue the discussion from there, shall we? Do you agree, as an atheist, that science is based upon these 4 foundations: logic, mathematics, testimony, and self-evident truth?
If I step into the atheist role for this discussion, yes, I can agree that science ultimately rests on those 4 foundations. 1. Logic. Without consistent reasoning, the scientific method collapses. 2. Mathematics. The language to model and quantify observations. 3. Testimony. In practice, most scientists rely on others' published results rather than personally replicating every experiment. 4. Self-evident truths. Foundational axioms like reality exists, or my senses are generally reliable, which can't be proven without circular reasoning. From an atheist's perspective, I'd accept these as necessary starting points, though I might phrase testimony more as documented empirical results, and self-evident truths as axioms or basic assumptions.
Now, regarding these 4 pillars, can we also agree that they are foundational and axiomatically true, and cannot be proven using science itself without falling into a circular process?
All right, staying in atheist mode. Yeah, I can grant that. These 4 are foundational in the sense that science needs them to even get off the ground. And yes, they're axiomatic because we don't prove them scientifically. We assume them before we start doing science. If I tried to scientifically prove logic, mathematics, testimony, or self-evident truths, I'd inevitably end up using those same tools in the proof, which is circular. So from the atheist perspective, I'd say, we have to start somewhere. So we accept these as givens. They're not proven by science. They're the preconditions for doing science. Where are you taking me with this line of questioning? I suspect you're about to argue that belief in God belongs in the same category.
Don't worry, just trust the process. Now, if the scientific method relies upon these 4 foundations to operate, being logic, mathematics, testimony, and self-evident truth, is it safe to assume that an argument that would be built on these foundations would be stronger and more credible than an argument built on the scientific method?
All right, still in atheist mode, I see where you're going. If we're being strict, yes, anything built on those foundations is, in a sense, more fundamental than science itself, because science depends on them to function. From my perspective as an atheist, I'd be cautious about saying stronger and more credible without nuance. But I would agree that The scientific method is a subset of reasoning that already assumes logic, mathematics, testimony, and self-evident truths. If an argument draws directly from those foundations, then science can't dismiss it just because it's not scientific, since science is downstream from them. So, yeah, in terms of epistemic priority, those foundational arguments would sit beneath science, supporting it. I'm guessing your next move is to frame belief in God as one of these foundational truths, right?
Well, not just one of them. Mathematics aside, I would say all of them. See, as Muslims, we not only have evidences for the existence of Allah, but there's so many that they're put in categories. The first one would be the intellect, or what you call logic. Second one is through the senses, which fits the observation aspects of science. The third one would be through our natural instinct, or fitrah, or what you call self-evident truth. And finally, through our legislated sources, the religious texts, which we receive through testimony. Now, before I present any argument from any of these categories, which we'll be doing, inshallah, do you still accept that if cogent, meaning valid, they make sense, they are correctly presented, these would constitute not only valid ways of proving Allah, a creator, but would be even more foundational than using the scientific method, which atheists usually demand, hypocritically, I might add?
All right, still an atheist mindset here. If we're staying consistent with what we just agreed on, then yes. If you could present a cogent argument from logic, sensory observation, self-evident truths, or trustworthy testimony, then by the very structure of our earlier discussion, those would be foundationally valid. That means they wouldn't need to pass through the scientific method's filter to be legitimate, because the method itself depends on those categories. Now, as an atheist, I'd still reserve the right to challenge whether your specific arguments actually do meet those criteria. But I wouldn't be able to just dismiss them outright with, "That's not scientific," without contradicting my own acceptance of those pillars. So yeah, logically speaking, I'd have to accept they're potentially more foundational than science itself, and that the only scientific evidence counts stance would be inconsistent. Want me to stay an atheist character while you drop the first categories argument?
Well, no, we're actually going to do that in a separate episode, inshallah. So this episode is going to be just that. That being, because I'll tell you why this is important, what we're doing here. Since in the last episode, we've shown that we cannot be boxed into that burden of proof, which would be relying solely on the scientific method, because it itself doesn't account for anything supernatural, for the existence or the potential existence of a God. Now, since we moved from that box, now we allowed ourselves to have room to present arguments, and the arguments that an atheist would have to accept by definition. Because now if we manage to prove the existence of Allah through the intellect or logic, through the senses, which science accounts for, through self-evident truth, which is the fitrah, through religious texts and reports that we get through testimony, which science also accounts for. Now, these are all foundations for the scientific method. Meaning, if someone says, no, I don't want any of that, I'm not going to accept any of these categories that you're presenting, any of these arguments that you're making, by definition, they have rejected the scientific method that is so dear to them. Because you cannot rely on something, that thing being the scientific method, and reject its very foundations. It's like you're saying, I accept something, but I don't accept what it is built upon. That doesn't make any sense. That would be a contradictory statement. So this is why this is important, building the bridge in a way that holds the person to these standards in a way that they cannot reject them. So it might sound to you at first glance that we didn't do much in this episode, but that's actually crucial for the rest of the arguments that we're going to present, inshallah. So we're going to do that. We're going to look at how to demonstrate that Allah exists through these things that we've listed, through the intellect, through the senses, through the fitrah, our natural disposition, even though we've looked at that in episode 1, and through the religious texts which we get through testimony. That's it for today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.